You ever notice how the little things, those tiny, harmless, everyday things somehow end up becoming the moments that change everything? For me, it was a faucet. Yeah, a stupid, leaky kitchen faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. Drip, drip, drip. Every hour of every day, that sound filled the silence in our home. It echoed in the background like a ticking clock on a bomb. And back then, my marriage? It was already fragile, like glass you keep pretending isn't cracked. And I think deep down, I was just waiting for something, anything, to break it wide open. I didn't plan it. I didn't see it coming. No one ever does. But what unraveled next still lives in a corner of my chest I don't let many people into. I guess I should start with this. I wasn't happy. And not in the dramatic, crying on the bathroom floor kind of way. No, it was quieter than that. It was the type of sadness that seeps in slowly, like fog slipping through the windows. You don't even realize how cold you've become until someone else walks in and brings warmth. And that someone was my stepson. I know what you're thinking. It sounds wrong. It feels wrong, even to say out loud. But this isn't the story people assume it is. This isn't about lust or forbidden fantasies. This is about loneliness. Emotional starvation. This is about the silent hunger we carry when we've gone too long without being seen, without being held, even just emotionally. He came back home after his first year at college, just for a few weeks. And in that short time, he did something his father hadn't done in years. He noticed me. Not in a sexual way. Not even in a romantic way, at first. He just saw me. He saw the way I stayed quiet during dinners when my husband scrolled through his phone. He noticed how I'd cook, hoping someone would say it tasted good. He picked up on the way I sat in silence with my coffee, staring at nothing. And one day, when that damn faucet wouldn't stop leaking, he stepped in. He offered to fix it. And I know it sounds like nothing, but something about the way he spoke to me, the way he looked at me when he handed me the wrench, like I mattered, like I wasn't invisible. God, it shook something awake in me I thought was long dead. I wish I could tell you it ended there. That I thanked him, the leak stopped, and life went on like normal. But no. That moment opened a door. And neither of us was ready for what would come through it. What happened between us wasn't planned. But it was real. Too real. And it would change everything. Not just for me. Not just for him. But for the family we were barely holding together. So, if you're still here, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold to hear more stories that reveal the raw, unspoken truths we carry. And keep watching, because what happened next might challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty and love. I live in one of those quiet suburbs. You know the kind, manicured lawns, white fences, neighbors who smile but never really ask how you're doing. Birds chirp like they're on a schedule, and nothing ever seems out of place. On the outside, it looks like peace. On the inside, it felt like I was slowly disappearing. I'm 38. Been married for 12 years. We moved here just last summer, chasing that fresh start fantasy people talk about. New house, new town, same old silence. My husband, Greg, he's one of those men who gets praised for providing. Hardworking, punctual. He pays the bills, keeps the grass cut, never cheated, at least not in the ways people talk about. But somehow he still managed to leave me starving. Not for food, not for money, but for something far simpler and far rarer. Presence, kindness, attention. We hadn't laughed in months, hadn't had sex in longer. We talked, but it was always about things that didn't matter. Groceries, light bills, what day the trash goes out. I'd say, "How was your day?" He'd mumble, "Fine," and that was that. Some nights I'd make dinner, light candles, pour wine, try to create a moment. He'd walk in, grumble about traffic, and scroll through his phone until the food got cold. I'd sit across from him, pretending I wasn't hoping he'd notice my new dress. Pretending I wasn't hoping he'd look up and see me. The house was warm, but only because I kept it that way. I lit the candles, I picked the soft throws. I arranged the flowers. But even with all that effort, it felt sterile. Empty. There were signs. Small ones, but they built up. A cracked teacup I'd meant to glue but left on the counter for weeks. Plants I stopped watering because watching them die felt weirdly comforting. Dinner plates left untouched, still arranged perfectly, but cold. And then came him. Tyler. Greg's son from his first marriage. I never thought much of their relationship before. Greg didn't talk about him often. Said he was off doing his own thing at college. Independent. Distant. Maybe too much like his father. But that summer he came home. Said he needed a break from school. Family issues with his mom. Greg barely asked questions, just tossed him the spare key and said, "Make yourself comfortable." From the moment Tyler walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Not in a dramatic way, just a subtle change in energy. Like someone opened a window in a stuffy room. He was quiet, but present. Polite. Observant. Didn't speak much at first. But when he did, he looked you in the eye. There was something in the way he carried himself. Like he saw more than he said. And even though I tried to keep my distance, he noticed things. Like how I always cleaned up alone after dinner. How Greg never offered help. How I sighed without meaning to when no one was listening. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched. Listened. One evening, I caught him standing in the hallway, watching me fold laundry. He said, "You do everything around here, don't you?" I didn't know how to answer. So I just smiled and kept folding. But his words? They lingered. It wasn't just that he said it. It was the way he said it. Like he saw me. Like he really saw me. Over time, we started talking more. Nothing inappropriate. Just small conversations. Movies. Books. Music. And I'll admit, it felt good. To talk to someone who responded. To be in a room with someone who didn't treat me like wallpaper. I'd forgotten what that felt like. He'd sit at the kitchen island while I cooked. Ask me about my day. Tell me about school, his mom, his friends. He had a quiet sadness to him. I could tell he was holding things in, just like me. We never said it out loud. But I think we both felt that same emptiness. Like two people wandering around a house that used to feel like home. Now just trying not to bump into ghosts. Greg, meanwhile, barely noticed. Didn't ask why Tyler was suddenly spending more time in the kitchen. Didn't notice the way I laughed more when Tyler was around. Didn't care that I stopped waiting for him to come home on time. He'd just walk in, nod, go straight to the couch. Another night, another beer, another silence. I wish I could say I didn't start looking forward to seeing Tyler each day. But I did. I really did. And I hated myself for it. But also, part of me felt alive again. Not because he was young. Not because he was handsome. But because he reminded me that I was still here. Still worth listening to. Still human. I wasn't looking for danger. I wasn't looking for love. I was just looking for something real. And I found it in the last place I ever expected. It was a Saturday. One of those lazy, gray ones where the clouds hang low like they're eavesdropping. Greg had already left, some emergency at work, or so he said. No goodbye. Just the sound of the front door clicking shut and the tires backing out the driveway. The house was still. Still in that quiet kind of way where you hear everything you normally ignore. The hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the hallway floorboards, and that damn dripping faucet. Drip, drip, drip. It had been leaking for weeks. I asked Greg to fix it. Twice. Maybe 3 times. Each time he shrugged and said, "I'll get to it." He never did. I stood at the sink that morning, sponge in hand, just staring at it. The slow, mocking drip. The way the water curled before it hit the steel. It was maddening. Somewhere between noise and silence. Then I heard footsteps. Tyler. He stepped into the kitchen, still half asleep, hair tousled, hoodie loose on his shoulders. He paused when he saw me, gave a soft, sleepy smile. I said, Sorry if the faucet woke you. He tilted his head, listened for a second, then shrugged. Nah, but it's annoying. I gave a weak laugh. Tell me about it. Then, without hesitation, he walked over, knelt down by the cabinet, and said, Want me to take a look at it? I blinked. You know how to fix sinks? He smirked. I've watched enough YouTube. Let's find out. There was something so casual about it, so unbothered, like it was no big deal to him to see a problem and just fix it. I handed him a wrench from the drawer. He reached up to take it, and our fingers touched. It was a small thing. Just skin brushing skin. But I felt it, not electricity, not desire. Just awareness. A jolt of I'm here, and so are you. He looked up briefly. I looked away. For a while, all I could hear was the clinking of tools and his quiet hums as he worked. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the way he focused. How careful he was. How present. Greg would have muttered the whole time. Cursed. Probably given up halfway and called a plumber. But Tyler? He actually seemed to care. At one point, he asked me to hold the flashlight. I bent down beside him, the two of us cramped under the sink. Close. Too close. I tried not to breathe too deeply. Tried not to notice the smell of his cologne, subtle, woodsy, clean. Then it happened again, our hands brushed. And this time, we both froze. It was just for a second. But in that second, I felt seen. Not as a mother. Not as his father's wife. But as a person. I pulled away quickly. Cleared my throat. Sorry. He didn't say anything at first. Just smiled a little. That should do it, he said, turning the wrench one final time. I stood up, turned on the faucet. The dripping had stopped. I laughed. Like really laughed. It had been so long since something worked the way it was supposed to. Thank you, I said, genuinely. He shrugged again, wiping his hands on a dish towel. No big deal. Then he paused, looked at me and said, By the way, that pasta you made last night? Best I've had in a while. I just stood there, frozen. That simple sentence cracked something open in me, because Greg hadn't complimented my cooking in years. Or anything, really. It had become routine. Expected. Taken for granted. But those few words from Tyler? They landed deep. Right where the ache was. After that, he lingered more. Not in a weird way. Just, he didn't rush to leave the room like before. He'd hang around the kitchen while I washed dishes. Ask me questions about old songs playing from my phone. Tell me stories from school. Make me laugh. And I found myself, staying longer too. Listening more closely. Looking forward to the next time we crossed paths in the hallway. It still felt harmless. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't physical. But something had shifted. A door had opened. And even though neither of us had stepped through it yet, we both knew it was there. Some nights I'd catch myself thinking about our conversations, replaying them in my mind like reruns. Wondering why they made me feel so light. Was it wrong? Maybe. But it was also the first time in months I didn't feel invisible. And that feeling? That's what planted the seed. I don't know when it started. That subtle shift in the air whenever he walked into a room. That flutter in my chest when I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs. That disappointment when they passed right by. I kept telling myself it was nothing. He was just easy to talk to. Just nice, kind, present. But still, I started noticing things I shouldn't. Like how I'd glance at the clock around the time he usually woke up just to time breakfast right. Or how I'd catch myself listening for his voice in the hallway, holding my breath until I heard it. And then, exhaling like it meant something. I tried to bury it. Tried to fold it into the background of everyday life, the same way I'd fold laundry and stack dishes neatly, quietly, like nothing was out of place. But I knew. I knew what it meant when I started wearing lipstick to make eggs. When I traded my old, oversized t-shirts for fitted tops on weekend mornings. When I added a touch of perfume before coming downstairs, just in case. That wasn't for Greg. Hadn't been for years. He wouldn't have noticed if I wore a Halloween costume to bed. No, it was for Tyler. And that realization? It scared me. Not just because of what it meant, but because of how natural it felt. How easy it was to slide into that space where I felt like me again. Alive. Wanted, even if only in my own mind. I caught myself one afternoon, digging through old DVDs in the cabinet, pulling out a dusty copy of Good Will Hunting. Tyler had mentioned it in passing, said it was one of his favorites, that he always cried at the same scene. And I found myself watching it that night, alone on the couch. And when that scene came on, I cried too. Not because of the movie, but because in that moment, I realized how long it had been since someone shared something real with me. And the next morning, I brought it up casually. Said, "Hey, I rewatched that movie you mentioned." He lit up. Right? That ending always gets me. And I nodded, smiling. But inside, I was sinking. Because I knew I hadn't watched it just for the story. I watched it for him. To feel close. To have something, anything, to connect over. And yet, I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. It wasn't like I was making a move. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't doing anything. I was just being friendly. He was just kind. That's all. But then, I'd notice how my heart skipped when he complimented my cooking, how I leaned in a little closer when he talked, how I smiled longer when he laughed. I started baking more, things I hadn't made in years. Tyler liked banana bread, so I made it. He liked jazz in the background, so I played it. It was subtle. Nothing you could point at and call wrong. But inside me, there was a war going on. One part of me was screaming, "What are you doing?" Another whispered, "It feels good, doesn't it?" I stopped meeting my own eyes in the mirror. Because every time I did, I saw someone I didn't quite recognize. Not the devoted wife. Not the mother figure. But a woman. A woman who had been numb for so long, she forgot what it felt like to be warmed from the inside out. And with that warmth came guilt. Not just for what I was feeling, but for how much I craved it. I'd find myself alone in the bathroom, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "What is wrong with me?" Greg hadn't cheated. He hadn't hurt me. He hadn't hit me or abandoned me. But he hadn't loved me either. Not in the way I needed. Not in a long time. And I was starting to wonder if emotional neglect was its own kind of betrayal. I told myself Tyler was just a boy. 18. Still figuring life out. This was just my loneliness talking. My imagination. But then I'd remember the way he looked at me sometimes, with this softness, this quiet attention I hadn't felt in years. And suddenly, it didn't feel so one-sided. I was starving for attention. And I didn't even realize it until I wasn't invisible anymore. That's the part that hurt the most. Not the confusion, not the guilt, but the fact that someone who wasn't even mine had made me feel more me than the man who was supposed to love me. And even though I knew I was walking a dangerous line, I wasn't ready to step away. Not yet. It was a Thursday night. Late. The kind of late where the house hums differently, like it's trying to keep secrets. Greg hadn't come home for dinner. Again. No text. No call. Just silence, like usual. I sat at the kitchen table alone, the food cold. Another meal for no one. Another effort gone unseen. Tyler came downstairs around 10. Said he couldn't sleep. I offered him some reheated lasagna. He accepted. We sat across from each other at the table, the overhead light casting soft shadows on the walls. The air between us, it felt familiar. Comfortable. Too comfortable. He took a bite and said, "This is amazing." You know that, right? I smiled, but something in my chest tightened. Then he asked me a question no one had asked me in a long time. What did you want to be when you were younger? I wasn't expecting it. It caught me off guard. I laughed. What do you mean? He said, before all this, the house, The marriage. What was the dream? I looked down at my hands, then up at him. And, for the first time in years, I told someone the truth. I wanted to be a writer, I said. I used to stay up late scribbling in notebooks. Stories, poems, anything, really. But then life happened. Bills, responsibility, and I just stopped. He nodded slowly, really listening. You should write again, he said. Even if no one reads it. I don't know what came over me. But I teared up. Not because of the suggestion, but because it had been so long since someone thought I still had dreams. That there was still something in me worth bringing back to life. That night we stayed up talking. Dreams. Regrets. Loneliness. I told him about the early days with Greg, how full of hope I was. How I thought love was enough. And how slowly it faded. He opened up too. Said things had been hard with his mom. That college was overwhelming. That he often felt like he didn't belong anywhere. We were two people, both lost, both needing something. But instead of pulling away, we kept leaning in. And every day after that, the lines blurred a little more. I started noticing how often I turned to Tyler instead of Greg, when something funny happened, when I was stressed, when I needed advice. He became my person, emotionally. And the guilt? It dulled, because it didn't feel wrong, not when we were just talking, just laughing, just listening. But then came that night. Greg had come home late again. Didn't apologize. Didn't ask about dinner. Just went straight to the living room, turned on the TV. I followed him, stood by the couch. I said softly, "Do you think we could maybe go out this weekend?" Just us. He didn't even look up. Busy. Maybe next week. That was it. No softness. No effort. And something in me snapped. I turned, about to walk away, but Tyler was standing in the doorway. I hadn't noticed him there. He looked between the two of us, then stepped into the room. And for the first time, he spoke up. He looked at Greg and said, "She's been trying, Dad. She makes dinner. She waits up. She asks you things and you barely answer. You don't even see her anymore." Greg blinked, clearly caught off guard. Then he scoffed. "What is this, some kind of intervention?" But Tyler didn't back down. "She deserves better. That's all I'm saying." Then he walked past him and into the kitchen. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. Because those words, those weren't just a defense. They were a confession. Not of love, not of anything tangible, but of care. Real, emotional care. That night, after Greg went to bed, I found Tyler outside on the porch, hoodie pulled up, staring at the stars. I sat beside him. We didn't say much. Just sat. I could feel the weight of what had happened hanging in the air between us. He didn't apologize. And I didn't ask him to, because he was right. He saw me. He stood up for me. And something about that moment, it cracked the foundation. Greg and I were still technically married. Still in the same house. But after that, it felt like we were just roommates, playing parts in a play we no longer believed in. I started waking up earlier, just to make coffee for Tyler. He'd leave me sticky notes with little quotes or funny sketches. He noticed when I cut my hair. He remembered things I said in passing. He made me feel again. I began to lean on him more than I should have. Emotionally, I was already over the edge. Physically, I hadn't crossed the line, but I was right there. And every time he smiled at me, every time our eyes lingered too long, every time our fingers brushed by accident, that line blurred. I wasn't stupid. I knew where this could go. But I also knew what it felt like to be alone for too long. To be untouched, unseen, unheard. And so, that night, as I lay in bed beside a man who hadn't kissed me in months, while my heart raced over another man who lived down the hall, I made a decision. One that would change everything. And I still don't know if it was right. The night it happened was stormy. Of course it was. Because don't they always say the sky knows things before we do? The rain had been falling for hours, steady, relentless. It tapped on the windows like it was trying to remind me, don't do this. Don't go there. But I didn't listen. The power went out just after 7. The house fell dark, quiet, aside from the hum of rain and the occasional groan of wind brushing against the siding. Greg was out of town for a conference. I didn't even remember where. I didn't ask. So it was just me and Tyler. He came downstairs after the blackout, flashlight in hand, and said, "Well, guess it's dinner by candlelight." I laughed. Too quickly. Too nervously. I lit a few candles in the kitchen. The good ones I usually saved for guests. Set them in the center of the table. Pulled out leftovers and poured 2 glasses of wine, though I knew I shouldn't have. And then we sat. Just the 2 of us, surrounded by flickering light and shadows that danced on the walls like ghosts. It should have felt awkward. It didn't. It felt safe. Too safe. We talked. About nothing. And then about everything. He told me about growing up feeling like a visitor in his own home. How he always felt like a burden between 2 parents who never stopped fighting. How college was just another place to feel like a stranger. And I told him the truth. How I spent most days convincing myself I wasn't fading. How I stared at blank pages, wanting to write but feeling hollow. How I missed laughter. How I missed being wanted. I didn't mean to cry, but the tears came anyway. Quiet at first, like the rain outside. He reached across the table, not with desire, not with agenda. Just with comfort. His hand rested on mine. And I didn't pull away, because in that moment, I just needed to feel like I mattered. He stood up, came to my side, knelt beside me like I was something sacred, broken, but still worth holding. He wrapped his arms around me. Soft, careful, not tight, but full. And I collapsed into him, my face buried into his shoulder, tears soaking into the fabric of his hoodie. His hand gently stroking my back like he knew I had been holding this in for years. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It felt like forever and no time at all. But I remember the warmth, the steady sound of his heartbeat, the way his breath caught when I looked up. And then it happened. A kiss. Soft, brief, a breath more than a touch. Like something we didn't mean to do, but also meant in every silent way. And the second it ended, the second our lips parted, time snapped back into place. I pulled away, stumbled back from him like I had been burned. Because maybe I had. He looked at me, eyes wide, heart racing, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. I shook my head, voice trembling. This can't happen. We can't. This never happened. My voice cracked on the last word, and the silence that followed was deafening. He nodded slowly, didn't argue, didn't reach for me again. Just stood there, still, like he understood. Because he did. And I turned and walked out of the kitchen, each step echoing like a door slamming shut. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. My thoughts were chaos. What have I done? He's just a boy. He's my husband's son. How did I let this happen? Why did it feel good? And worse than the guilt was the longing. Because for one fleeting second, I had felt alive, desired, held, and I wasn't ready to admit how much I missed all of it. But I also knew this was the line, and we had touched it, barely. But it was enough. Enough to ruin everything. Enough to stain what little remained of the woman I used to be. The morning after felt like a bad dream. You know that feeling when you wake up and, for a split second, everything feels normal again? Before your memory slaps you across the face? That was me. I opened my eyes to sunlight pouring through the blinds, birds chirping like nothing had happened. Like the world was still turning, perfectly fine. But inside, I was unraveling. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, my mouth dry, my chest tight. And then it all came back, the candlelight. the tears, the warmth of his arms, the kiss. I closed my eyes, trying to push it away, trying to pretend it hadn't happened, trying to forget how good it had felt, how dangerous it was to remember. I didn't see Tyler that morning. He was up before me. By the time I made it to the kitchen, he had already packed most of his things. Suitcase zipped, backpack over his shoulder. I wanted to say something, anything, but what do you say after something like that? Sorry I kissed you? Thanks for holding me while I shattered? Let's pretend we're strangers again? Instead, I hovered awkwardly in the doorway as he stood by the sink. The same sink we fixed together. The same place this all began. He didn't look at me. Not directly. He just said, "I'm heading back to campus." Figured I'd get a head start on some things. I nodded too quickly. Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense. My voice was shaky, thin. He gave me a small smile. Tight-lipped. Polite. Like we were back to being acquaintances. But his eyes? They were tired. Sad. Like mine. He picked up his bag and started walking toward the door. And just before he left, he paused. Still not looking at me, he said, "I meant what I said last night. You deserve more than what you've been given." Then he left. And the door clicked shut behind him. Just like that, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. The silence in the house was deafening. Every clock ticked louder. Every corner felt colder. I thought I'd feel relief. That the distance would help. That with him gone, I could gather myself, breathe again, go back to whatever normal was supposed to be. But instead, I felt hollow. Like I had swallowed something sharp and it was cutting me from the inside. When Greg came home that evening, he barely noticed. He tossed his keys in the bowl, loosened his tie, and said, "Feels quieter around here. Guess it's lighter without Tyler." I smiled. A lie, of course. Because the truth? The house didn't feel lighter. It felt vacant. Like something real had been taken from it. Like someone had walked out with all the warmth. I watched Greg go about his routine. Dinner. TV. Scrolling on his phone. No questions. No mention of me. Just existing beside me, as if I were furniture. And that's when the spiral started. Did I ruin him? Tyler. So young. So kind. Did I plant something in him he didn't know how to carry? Did I cross a line he'll never unsee? Did I damage something in him that wasn't mine to touch? And then the other question, the one that kept circling back like a storm cloud that wouldn't leave. Did I ruin myself? Because something about that moment, about us, had torn a hole in the version of me I used to be. I couldn't go back to her. To the woman who lived on scraps of attention. To the wife who smiled through silence. To the shell that stayed quiet to keep the peace. She was gone. And in her place was someone who had tasted connection again, and now couldn't pretend she didn't know what it felt like. I wanted to tell Greg. I wanted to scream, "Do you see me now? Do you see what your neglect did? Do you care?" But I didn't. I stayed silent. Like always. And every night after that, when I laid beside him, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if Tyler was okay. If he hated me, if he regretted it, if he thought of me at all. And the worst part? I missed him. Not just the conversations. Not just the attention. But the feeling of being held when I needed it most. Of being someone again. And now? Now I was just a ghost in my own life. Haunted by a moment that was never supposed to happen, but did. What kind of woman even lets that happen? That's the question I kept asking myself, again and again and again. Each time I passed by the kitchen sink. Each time I opened the hallway closet and saw his old sneakers still sitting there. Each time I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. What kind of woman am I? Not the kind I thought I was. Not the loyal wife. Not the mature adult. Not the mother figure. And yet, not a monster either. Some days I sat on the porch with a journal, pen in hand, writing things I could never say out loud. Trying to make sense of what happened. Trying to untangle the knot inside me. I'd go for walks. Long ones. Past the rows of perfect houses where nothing ever seems out of place. Where curtains are drawn and no one talks about the things that really go on behind closed doors. I walked in circles, as if I could outpace the memory. But it followed me. Everywhere. It lingered in my coffee. In the way I lingered at his empty chair at the kitchen table. In the ache that settled deep in my chest at night, just before sleep, when everything else gets quiet. I tried to convince myself it hadn't meant what I thought it did. That it was just one kiss. That it was just emotion. That it was just a mistake. But the truth is, it wasn't just anything. It was everything. Because it showed me what I was missing. What I had buried for years. What I had stopped even daring to want. And that terrified me. Weeks passed. No word from him. And then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message. From Tyler. Just 5 words. I hope you're okay. I meant no harm. That was it. And I cried. I really cried. For the first time since he left. Not the quiet tears I'd hidden in the shower. Not the polite ones I blinked away during dinner. But the kind that made my shoulders shake. The kind you feel in your throat. The kind that pours out every ounce of confusion, shame, and sadness. Because in that one message, I heard it all. The guilt. The softness. The kindness. He didn't hate me. He didn't accuse me. He was just hurting too. Trying to make peace with something that had no name. And I realized, maybe that's what this really was. 2 people, both invisible in their own lives. Both aching for something they didn't know they needed. 2 people, reaching for light in the dark and colliding in the worst way. Was it emotional abuse? I don't know. Was it inappropriate? Absolutely. But was it just loneliness? Was it the aching need to be seen, held, heard? Yes. God, yes. That's the part no one tells you about infidelity. It's not always about passion or lust. Sometimes, it's about pain. Unspoken, unacknowledged, unmet. Sometimes you end up in places you never thought you'd go because you've spent too long waiting for someone to notice you're even there. And when someone finally does, you mistake that spark for salvation. I don't have the answers. Not yet. I'm still trying to forgive myself. Still trying to understand how I got here. But one thing I know for sure, that moment didn't make me a bad person. It made me a human one. Flawed, hurting, desperate for connection. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we stop pretending those things don't matter. This story, it isn't easy to tell. And believe me, I've thought 100 times about keeping it locked away forever. But the truth is, it's real. It happened. And I still don't know how to feel about it. I'm not proud, but I'm not pretending either. Because sometimes, life pulls us into places we never imagined. Not because we're bad people, but because we're hurting and tired and starving for something that feels like home. Have you ever connected with someone you weren't supposed to? Not necessarily in a romantic way, but in a way that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? If you have, you're not alone. And I'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, your truth. Share it in the comments. I'm listening. And if this story touched something in you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here at Heartfelt Tales Unfold, we don't run from the messy parts. We tell the stories most people are too afraid to speak out loud. And sometimes, those are the ones we need the most. Loneliness doesn't knock. It doesn't shout or scream or come crashing through the front door. It seeps in. Slowly, silently. One missed hug at a time. One empty dinner table. One unanswered question. Until one day, you look around and realize you haven't felt truly held in years. And that's when the danger comes. Because when you're that empty, the wrong attention can start to feel like love. A kind word becomes a lifeline. A long look feels like safety. A shared laugh becomes a reason to stay a little longer in the room. I thought I was strong. I thought I could draw the line and keep it clear. But the truth is, some lines? they blur before you even know they're fading. And once they're crossed, there's no going back. Not really. I learned something the hard way. Attention isn't always affection, and affection isn't always love. Sometimes it's just two broken people trying to put warmth where the cold has lived for too long. Trying to stitch a moment of meaning into an otherwise empty day. But meaning doesn't erase the cost. And every time you reach for something that isn't yours, you lose a little more of yourself. I live with that now. Not with shame. Not anymore. But with awareness. With a kind of quiet grief that settles deep in the bones. Because some moments, no matter how brief, they stay with you. Etched into the rhythm of your days. Haunting the silence. And some lines, once blurred, are impossible to redraw. Sometimes I walk down the hallway, passing by the spot where he once leaned against the wall, arms crossed, telling me about some stupid college prank, smiling like he was still a boy trying to be a man. And I still see him there. Not in flesh, but in memory, and every time I do. I wonder what could have been if I had just said no, but I didn't. And now I live in the space between regret and understanding. Between knowing better and having needed something so badly, I took it anyway. And if you're listening, if you're standing near a line of your own, please hear this. Don't wait until it's too late to ask yourself why you're crossing it. Because healing from pain is hard, but healing from guilt is something else entirely. And sometimes the scar it leaves isn't just on you. It's on someone else who trusted you to know better.